Good afternoon and happy Sunday to all of you out there this week. Today, I'm coming back from a couple of weeks of travel. And on the way back from that trip, I took a ride home with a taxi driver. And this taxi driver, she was from Ethiopia originally. She'd come over from Ethiopia, I think she said about 3 decades ago. And I asked her how the current conflict going on in Ethiopia, and for those of you who aren't familiar, there's essentially a civil war going on, particularly in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, how that was affecting her and her family. So thankfully, most of her family is out of that area and over here in the United States now. But we got into a great conversation about the background of that particular region, how things came to be, some of the failings of governance, and what the responsibility of other countries is to that region. And so I thought that was a great opportunity to discuss the ideas of being an interventionist versus being an isolationist as a humanist. And this, I think, applies not only at the geopolitical level, but also in our individual lives and in our communities. And so I wanted to share some thoughts related to that for this week. So one of the things that she said, which really caused me to think about this conversation for this week, is that, countries around the world should do more. Right. And I think that's particularly in cases of the Western countries that have more resources available to dedicate to something like this. And having spent a fair amount of time looking at the challenges of Africa, one of the things that we have found to be true, or a truism, if you will, is that you can't want it more than they do, right? They being the partner country, the society, the people, the tribes. And then if you bring that back to our individual daily lives, think about that in terms of people who are going through struggles in their own lives, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's getting over addiction, whether it's dealing with some very difficult relationship. And you can't help people if they don't want it. So you can't want to fix something more than someone else does. This is really important. And this gets to one of the core tenets of humanism. So on one hand, right, so from the interventionist side of things, we humans under humanism believe that we have the ability to make the future better. That means we have to do something, right? We're constantly taking action to improve our future. But on the other hand, another tenet of humanism that we haven't really discussed as much is that the individual is the best representative of their interests. Now, that's individual in terms of person, community, country, because in theory, and I would argue in practice, that person is the best representative for them. Because what happens is if we have this sense of imperialism that we know better than others and we have a better solution if only they would follow us for their own good, is a lot of the excesses of violence and genocide over the last couple of centuries have really stemmed from that idea of a complete utilitarianism, that if we only killed these many people, then the world would be at peace. And I think we found that when someone starts to go down that line of thought, it never ends, right? They always know better than others, and anyone that is opposing them, then the utilitarianism of that particular logic justifies any level of violence. And so you have this degradation of society, and we've had world wars about this exact thing. And so instead, we have to give credit to the individual to represent what is best for them. But that also means that we can't simply go in and give help when none is required from that other person or country's perspective. Now, on one hand, I very much agree with her. I think that the West and people with the resources can and should do more to facilitate peace, prosperity, and progress around the world. Because humanity only survives when we have progress. Right? No species survives in the long term if it stagnates and it doesn't progress, it doesn't adapt, and it doesn't evolve. But at the same time, other countries going in and providing forced solutions tend not to ever last, because there's no willingness to accept the solution as and to really have the ownership of that solution. So what's the balance here? While we don't want to go in and be interventionist in the sense of applying our solution to others' problems without being asked, we also can't simply sit back and do nothing. The isolationist approach to me, is not a sustainable one either. If we simply say, well, that's very far away and it doesn't affect us, I found through my studies in working with the government that is very much not true. Instability is never contained. It's always something that will move from place to place if given time and opportunity. This links back to our conversation related to entropy and chaos and stability, that it's much easier to destroy systems and to create chaos than it is to build them, right? It takes energy to build something into having structure. And so if we allow for chaos to thrive unabated, that chaos will eventually affect us wherever we are in the world. So there's this balance to be struck then where we have to engage, and it's really out of a self-interest, right? I'm personally not a big fan of the idea of pure altruism. I believe that you can do altruistic things for longer term reasons and reasons that transcend the individual existence. But I believe that there's still a level of self-interest in that, in the continuation of human meaning in your family, in your community, and protecting that in the long term. And that's why people do sacrifice themselves individually. It's one of our, I would say, transcendent characteristics as a human species. But at the same time, it's not something where, again, we can go in and simply say, we're going to do this for your own good and our own good, because the solution is unlikely to take in that case. But we do have to do something. So in the interim, before really help is asked or those who need it are willing to receive it, we can advocate for help. Right? We can advocate for the constructs that facilitate dialogue. We can provide resources for those who are suffering, honestly, at the hands of sometimes very corrupt and nearsighted governments. And as individuals, we can lobby our own governments to facilitate that dialogue. I think this is really important. A lot of times, again, we see problems as far away, but they will affect us eventually. And if you look at the grand scope of human history and zoom out on our time scale, our wasting of resources on conflict and petty grudges is hugely inefficient to creating that human progress necessary for our long-term survival. And so we have to be able to zoom out and say, okay, it's a little bit more work on me now, but I can prevent this broader catastrophe, right? And in the case of Ethiopia, there's currently famine going on. There are tens of millions of people that live in the country. It's one of the more populous countries in Africa. And we're talking about massive human suffering that simply doesn't break through our signal to noise barrier here in the West, because there's not a clear, and I would honestly say, commercial interest in that region. And I think that's a terrible shame. So again, I wanted to offer those thoughts today to show the balance that is required between isolationism and interventionism, because there's risk on either side, particularly if you take either two extremes. And the last thing I would leave you with is that America in particular, right, where I'm recording this from, is a land of extraordinary abundance. And when you look at the past 80 years or so, we have provided safety and stability around the world. Now, it wasn't always desired, right? And a lot of times there was significant post-colonialism, interventionism, imperialism on our part. But at the same time, we did provide for a more interconnected world, greater peace and prosperity, simply by securing shipping and allowing for global trade under the umbrella of US security. Now, again, there's the danger of imperialism there. But on the other hand, we've used our extraordinary resources to allow for the kind of progress that has really moved the world forward and helped us understand that we are more connected. The reason I offer this is not to say that America is so great. It's simply by the passage of history that we happen to have landed on and taken a huge amount of resources that allow us to have excess, right? That abundance is what is necessary for progress. If you have only enough, you don't progress, you just tread water, you stay where you are. But having a little bit more allows you to invest in the future, right? To do things like space exploration, which we know in the long term, the very, very long term, will be required for human survival. And so we have to be very careful about how we use those resources because they are not infinite. And so I would rather us be investing them in the human future than hoarding them for our own extravagance or wasting them on conflict. So in your daily lives, think about this balance. Think about how you can intervene to a degree requested, right? And the one that you can make available to people who are in need? What is it that you can do? What resources can you provide? Can you be a good friend? Can you give people critical feedback that they need to a degree they're willing to accept it? Can you build your community? Can you go out and provide services? Can you donate things? Can you cut back on your consumption in ways that do help the whole? So you're being a little bit interventionist there. And on the flip side, how do you give people the space to learn and grow, to see their mistakes and then help them know how to ask for help? These are really important things that we have to balance in our lives. And so I look forward to the conversation that we continue to have about how we balance interventionism versus isolationism, and how as humans, under our humanist ideology, we work to make the world a better place. Thanks very much for tuning in this week. I appreciate your interest. These are important conversations. If you enjoy these, please share these with your friends. They're not particularly religious in the sense of being theological, but I hope that they are conversations that help us to be a little bit more introspective, a bit more reflective, and figure out better ways to do things in the long run. So do please share. We look forward to continuing that conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you.